Happy birthday, homie. For me? Yeah. Happy birthday, homeboy. For me? Yeah. Make a wish.
What's going on, good people? This is the common man, Nate Lewis, with the common take on... let's just get that out of the way. This is a very special show I'm doing today. What makes it so special? Today marks the common man's 30th birthday. That's right, I've now hit the 30 plus status. It is something I've not been looking forward to over the last couple years. I'm getting over it, or I've kind of come to terms with it. I'm going to accept it. I'm just going to go with the whole Jay-Z philosophy, 30 is the new 20, and move on. So, today, in honor of my birthday, I decided to make this show all about me. And what does that mean? Well, that means I'm going to take the time now and kind of go over my top 5 pro wrestling matches that my personal favorites, I should say, and my top 5 favorite MMA fights as well. So, I'm just actually didn't know which one to start with. So actually, I am going to spin a coin. Heads means I'll watch him do MMA first, and it lands on tails. So we'll hit the my top 5 favorite pro wrestling matches. Now, I've been watching pro wrestling since I was a little kid. It's probably first event I remember watching was actually WCW Saturday Night, and it was a Ric Flair segment. So I have always been a Ric Flair fan, and I've been really watching from that point on. Back when WWF at the time had the Coliseum home videos, I would constantly go to my local video store and rent those things and watch them over and over and over again. I got up early on Saturdays and watched WWF Superstars. So pro wrestling's been in my life pretty much my whole life. So without further ado, the top 5 pro wrestling matches for the common man, Nate Lewis. And coming in at number 5, Sami Zayn versus Antonio Cesaro from NXT Arrival. This match, I spent a long time debating this list as opposed to my MMA list, which took a little bit less time. But this match to me was, it was kind of what made this match special for me is prior to the WWE Network. I've heard of NXT. I've heard of a couple talents down there, but I never actually watched the show. So NXT Rival was my very first introduction into NXT, which, as you can now tell, I review every week here on this program. So going into this match, I seen the promo video they had prior to the match, and it looked like a pretty interesting storyline. And I knew of Cesaro from the time he had on SmackDown and his current push on the main roster. But this match was fucking awesome. This is a match that opened me up to the eyes of Sami Zayn, and then going back and watching his time as Delirious on the independent circuit and in Ring of Honor. But I wasn't expecting much going into this match. I believe I watched the event maybe the next day after it aired, so I heard this match was good. But it was this is one of those times where people kind of undersell a match. From what I heard, I was hearing all these people saying good things. They spent a lot of time talking about the show as a whole. And going into this match, I had mediocre expectations, and it was greatly exceeded. The spot where Sami Zayn went in between the ropes in the corner and nailed the DDT is a spot I hadn't seen prior to that match. The match was so good that for all of, 2014? All of 2014, and this match took place at the very beginning of that year. I said throughout there is no match that year that would top that match. And not only did I at the end of the year say it was going to be that it was the match of the year, but there's several other publications as well that called it the match of the year. It was a great match. It told a great story. The two had a match prior which Cesaro had won, and this was Sami Zayn's kind of, I want to seek retribution. I know I can beat you. I'm going to beat you. And it was a consummate underdog against a guy that was on the main roster and seen as the superior athlete, the superior wrestler. And at the end, Sami's kicking out of all these big moves. There was a huge uppercut spot in the match for Cesaro. I believe he also hit the I should probably go back and watch this match now that I'm talking about it. I believe he hit the neutralizer and Sami kicked out then. And then in a fit of rage, and this is like this little moment where Sami's kind of picking himself back up off his feet, and Cesaro just realized, I have to kill this man. And he gears up and he hits this giant uppercut and gets the pin. It's a beautiful match. Most of you listening have already seen the match, but if it's been a while, hop on the network, or it might be on, I'm not going to endorse you to watch on YouTube. I'm a WWE shareholder, so please, just if you don't have the network, go subscribe. You get it free for a month, and check that match out. Number 4, we're going to go back into 1991 with the Macho Man Randy Savage versus the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 7. They labeled this the career-ending match. Savage and Warrior had a storyline going into this one that really kind of started at the Royal Rumble of that year. Warrior went in as the WWF champion to face Sergeant Slaughter, and Macho Man thought he was deserving of a title shot. And so they shot an angle where Sensational Sherry's out there basically saying, hey, Warrior, I will blow you for Randy Savage to get a title shot. It's many of you have already seen the angle. Warrior then violently shakes and tells her no. Then Savage runs down during the match, beats up on Warrior. Warrior gets back in the match. They continue to keep going until finally Savage hits Warrior with the scepter, and we get a new WWF champion, which takes us to WrestleMania. The loser of this match must retire, and this match, unfortunately, neither one of these guys are with us anymore, and it's a shame. Looking back on the career of the Warrior, people will knock the Warrior for his attitude. They'll knock the Warrior for his wrestling capabilities and things like that. But then you could look at this match here and his match with Hogan at WrestleMania 6 a year prior. It's two really, really, really good matches, and really good matches featuring Ultimate Warrior. Now, the legend that's out there that Randy was the type to kind of really move for move, step for step, choreograph his matches. And I've always been of the belief when people say, oh, well, it can't be that, well, it should be that great because he's mapped out the whole match. Well, if that's the case, then these young guys need to be mapping out their matches. Absolute beautiful match. Both guys going back and forth, and we get one of my favorite moments ever where Savage just keeps going up to the top rope, landing the elbow, going back up, landing the elbow, going back up, landing the elbow, yada, yada, yada. And Warrior still kicks out. And there's a point where Warrior does the press slam and Savage kicks out. And this part always kind of boggles my mind. Gorilla Monsoon tries to do a job of when the Warrior's kind of looking at his hands and going, kind of just, I don't know what he's doing, but Gorilla's telling us he's talking to the wrestling guys or talking to the guys and saying, why, what do I have to do, things like that. And we eventually, actually, hang on one moment, guys. Just got a message here from my boss, which is never a good thing. Okay. I can answer that here in a minute. And so we get Gorilla Monsoon trying to sell us on the fact that Warrior's trying everything he can. Maybe it's his time to step away. And eventually Savage sneaks up behind Warrior, attacks him. And apparently at that time, the guys told Warrior, hey, retire this fucker. And we get the ending of the match with Warrior standing triumphantly on Savage's chest. And I mean, most of us know where the post story went. Warrior then goes off. Savage is forced to retire. Sensational Sherry was in Randy's corner, beats up on Randy. Elizabeth makes the save. Elizabeth and Savage embrace, leading to a moment where, I mean, they pan to the crowd and people are crying. They're in tears. It's Randy Savage is back to being a babyface. Tremendous match. Number 3. And this one, I hate that we have to do this. And when I say we, I mean people who cover pro wrestling in any type of medium. It's anytime you have to mention, well, I'll tell you the match. It's Chris Benoit versus Kurt Angle, Royal Rumble 2003. And it seems like we all have to be, always has to be a disclaimer when we're talking about Chris Benoit, because it's such a controversial topic. When I talk about this match, I'm talking about Benoit the wrestler, Benoit the character at that time. I'll just put it like that. So, this match, this is actually during a period where I don't want to say slowed down watching wrestling, but I mean, at that time, Hunter had taken over the shows, and Scott Steiner had come in, and that looked like shit. So I was kind of off and on here. So I saw this match much, much later. And unlike the Sami Zayn and Cesaro match, I heard this match was one of the best matches ever. And so you go in watching a match months after it happened, you know the result, and you're going, all right, this match is supposed to be the best match ever. And you're waiting for that moment where you can actually say, wow, okay, people are right, or nah, it was good, not great. This match never disappointed at all. I don't really have too much to add on it other than I almost made a strong case for putting this number 1 even. It ended up falling at number 3 for kind of more emotional reasons for me, and I'll get to that when I mention the other 2, but this was an excellent match. So when I bring up emotion and memories for me, you're going to hear quite a bit of it when I talk about these next 2. Number 2, which was number 1 for from the time I saw this match right up until maybe 6 years ago, Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart at WrestleMania 12. At the time going into it, I was on that. I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I was drinking the WWF Kool-Aid when it came to Shawn Michaels. I thought he was cool. He was athletic. He had a cool finisher. Just everything about Shawn Michaels was great to me at that time. And Bret Hart had been a guy who I liked and who was my brother's favorite wrestler at the time. And to me, I mean, it was 1 and 2. It was 1 and 2. And Bret being number 1 and Shawn coming right up behind him. And they had this great storyline. Well, at the time, looking back now, it was a little hokey, and then it's also kind of disturbing when you think about it. Going back to Survivor Series, Shawn had suffered a concussion, which is always funny when we talk nowadays about what's going on in professional wrestling or really in sports in general when it comes to concussions. They treated this as if it was career-ending and maybe life-altering. But Shawn eventually gets cleared, wins the Rumble, and we head into this match. And this match is announced that it will be an Iron Man match. The first time in WrestleMania history that we will have a match go exactly 1 hour. Now, the match itself, I'm going to be really honest here. I can't sit through that whole match again. I watched that match a couple weeks after it happened, and I watched the match again a few years later when it was released on some DVD. But it's not the type of match that you can just pop on, watch, and appreciate. So a lot of people, when people mention that this is their favorite match ever, you'll hear them say, oh, I remember watching it live, or this, that, or the other. And for people who didn't, or people who heard about it and then went and watched it, they'll tell you it's overrated. It's not. It's one of those things that is one of those matches that doesn't necessarily hold up. It's a great match in of itself. But there were periods where it kind of lulled and things like that. And we've gotten more exciting 60-minute matches since then. But just for it being at its time, it was a tremendous match. Great ending. It should have set up for big things for these guys, drawing money for the company for years to come. And unfortunately, we all know how that ended. So, like I said, that match was number 1 for me for the longest time. And then I saw my number 1 match here. I saw this. This would have been 2006 or 2007-ish. It's almost about 9 years ago, actually. Ric Flair had been with the company. He was doing the retirement angle between 2007 and 2008. And they released an Ultimate Ric Flair DVD box set. And so I'm watching this, and they have a match on there. Oh, no, I'm mistaken. Actually, it was during that time. I was working at Best Buy, so any new WWE DVD that came in, I bought just on instinct. And actually, one came in, which was the greatest wrestling superstars of the 80s. Now, I was more of a 90s kid when it comes to pro wrestling, but I was interested in some of the later stuff that happened in the 80s. And one of the matches on there just completely blew me away. I mean, I popped this thing in, watched the match, I watched it again, and I watched it again. And this easily now is my number one. Flair versus Steamboat, Chi-Town Rumble, 1989. Now, people who are Flair Steamboat fans of their series of matches, those three matches in 89, people can make their case for this one or the 2 out of 3 falls or the Wrestle War, any one of the three being the best of the three. And any reason that anyone gives you is a great one. Just to me, it was in Chicago, so that's, that gets a little notch for me there. And B, it was the more fast pace of the three. And so, I mean, there was never a time when you're watching this match kind of going, okay, when are we getting to this? This was spot, just great storytelling. I don't have much to add to this. This is just my favorite. I mean, it's one of the ones when I watched it, no matter if I knew the outcome, it was awesome. I can watch it right now, and I actually might put it on in the background as I'm recording this. I can watch it right now and absolutely love it. So it had to be number one on the list. Now, I want to throw in a couple honorable mentions because, like I said, the Sami Zayn and Cesaro thing was I had to teeter and I was back and forth with that, but I wanted to acknowledge that it opened up my eyes to NXT, so it kind of that in and of itself gave it the 5th spot. But there were 3 other ones I was considering adding to this list very strongly. And some of you listening might be going, "Oh wow, you're so WWE heavy." Even though my number one match is an NWA match, you're so WWE heavy. There's so many great matches in New Japan. There's so many great matches over in Ring of Honor or TNA. That's all very well and good and true. I've seen some great matches and matches that if I honestly watched again might replace something that's on this list. But that's just not the nature of the beast. But these are the 3 that just barely missed the cut. I mean, barely. Undertaker in HBK at WrestleMania 25, or people call it Taker HBK 1. This was a match where I didn't watch this live again. Sorry, I know I'm saying this live. I didn't watch the match as it happened. I watched this maybe about a year later, right before they started going into the storyline for the WrestleMania 26 rematch. And I can get into the reasons why I watched this match that much later, but maybe I'll save that for another podcast show. But just watching this match, this is another one very much like Flair and Steamboat, where, hell, you knew going into the match what the outcome would be, and this match was still phenomenal. And the ending of the match with Shawn going for the moonsault and going right into a tombstone spot was able to set the seeds for the rematch we then had next year, where Shawn said, "I could have beat him. I just made one mistake. I made one stupid mistake." And to me, it's a phenomenal match. These two actually have never had a bad match. You can go back to the Ground Zero match, the Hell in a Cell, which is Dave Meltzer gave a 5-star rating to. That was close to being on this list as well. It was almost in honorable mentions too, but I ended up going with this one instead. Another one on honorable mentions is a triple threat match. Guess what? If you're a TNA fan, here you go. AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe at Unbreakable 2005. Now, for those who are big TNA fans and they get all upset over any knock on TNA, I'm going to knock TNA, I'm going to give them a little credit, and I'm going to talk quickly about this match. I'm going to knock them. Look, you've been around since 2012. The company's never made any money. Your booking's been shit. You waste an extreme amount of money on guys, bring them in, look like geeks. Just everything about the way this company is set up is terrible and has been from its inception. However, there was a long period of time where, as bad as you want to talk about the booking, the production, everything wrong with the company, the best things were the matches. And this match here between Styles, Daniels, and Joe, it was during a period of time where I was actually buying TNA pay-per-views. I didn't want to watch their television, but their pay-per-views were on point. And this match, I had mentioned before or on the Daniel Bryan retirement podcast that I knew who AJ Styles was, and I was a fan when I watched that match with Danielson. And it was because of me purchasing the TNA DVDs, and especially after seeing this match, made me such a huge AJ Styles fan. Made me a Christopher Daniels fan, made me a Samoa Joe fan. Look, it's harder to tell you to go back and watch things that are not available on the network, but you can find this match on YouTube. Go watch it. I believe they did another match. I'm not sure what event that was. I know they did one shortly after this one, but this match was just fucking awesome. And if I had to rate your triple threat, your 6-pack challenges, your fatal 4-ways, this is maybe my favorite multi-person match ever. And my final honorable mention, and this one, this one I actually did watch when it happened. So yeah, we got that. But also, I think it's one of the most underrated matches ever. And I don't use that term lightly. It is extremely underrated. And that being Bret Hart versus Owen Hart, the opening match at WrestleMania 10. Now, some of you saying, like, no, it's not underrated. Yeah, the hell it is. Part of what makes it underrated is it also was on the same show as the Razor Ramon Shawn Michaels ladder match in that same pay-per-view. So, I mean, the lure of the ladder match and reinventing the ladder match is what Razor and Shawn did. That lives on forever in TLC matches and Money in the Bank matches. But this match is not, that in and of itself isn't a reason why this match is also underrated. These two then went and had a match at SummerSlam of that same year in 1994 in a steel cage that is considered maybe one of the greatest steel cage matches of all time. So this match just gets buried in that, and this match is so great. Lawler in particular really helped this match. If you don't know the storyline going in, Bret and Owen were in a Survivor Series match along with their other brothers, and I forgot who. I think they may have been facing Shawn Michaels and some other guys that was on his team. Actually, yeah. No, that came later. But anyway, Owen ended up being the only one eliminated from the match. The rest of the Hart family all survived the match, and Owen, kind of teased being a little jealous. They patch things up on TV, and we get to the Royal Rumble where they're going for the Tag Team Championship match. And in a promo, Bret's talking about we put everything behind us, and we're coming right after the title. So they hit to this match. Bret gets just beat on and beat on and beat on and beat on, and Owen's reaching for the tag, and it's done in such a way, that match, that it to the actual casual viewer is like, well, Bret's trying to tag his brother and he's trying to win the match. But a good heel is able to find truth in what he is upset about or what his grievance is. And to Owen, it was you had plenty of chances to tag me into that match for us to win the match, but you had to make it about you. You're the one, you're dad's favorite, you're this, you're that. It was just a classic brotherly disagreement and argument that all of us have with our siblings. Now, another reason this match kind of is always a favorite of mine is anytime there's a Matt and Jeff Hardy feud, or you get your kayfabe tag team brothers or something like that, and they put them in a feud and it doesn't work, you'll hear Wade Keller or Brian Alvarez or Dave Meltzer. They'll come and say, hey, the brothers feud never works. And I always go, what the fuck? Bret know it. It worked for almost the entirety of 1994. It actually worked for 1995 as well. It worked all the way up until those guys all got together in 97 and formed the Hart Foundation. even before that happened, you still had a tease of dissension before Owen basically broke down and cried and joined Brett. This match is so great. Like I said, Lawler is so good too here, trying to sell that, Owen's wanting to take the spotlight. Brett's been hogging the spotlight. This is Owen's chance. And the victory roll spot where Owen steps in, gets the pin. Think about that for a second. You have the guy who is, at the time, even though they were trying to push Lex as being the number one babyface, Brett was the number one babyface. And Brett lost earlier in the night to help establish a feud with his brother, who can then say, hey, I beat you. Just classic. Now the more I'm talking about, the more I'm really thinking I should have put this on the list. I love this fucking match. And I'm sorry about that, guys. Had to take a quick break as something just came up. Getting more happy birthdays from everybody and had to take a phone call. But yeah, the more I sit here and think about the Brett and Owen thing, I'm thinking, maybe I should have put that one in the 5. But I stand by my top 5 list. They're my favorites. I mean, if you disagree with it, that's great. Give me your top 5. We can discuss that. But that's my top 5 favorite matches. I'm sure some of those matches would probably be in your top 5 as well. Moving on. Top 5 MMA fights. I said earlier I didn't have to think too much on this one, as my top 4 have been set for, 3 of my top 4 have been set for a long time. One of them I just actually seen recently, and it's one of the ones where I had to bring my son and my wife in to watch too, because it was just so great. But I started watching MMA. I started watching MMA definitely by about the time that Tough season 1 started. I had seen a couple of events because, like I said, at the time I was working at Best Buy, so I was able to kind of pick up some DVDs, and they were pretty cheap on my discount. So I watched UFC 47 with Chuck and Ortiz, and that was my kind of first exposure to this business. And Tough, coming up at the time it did, being on Spike TV and having a live fight every week, was just like blew my mind. And I know we live in a day and age now where there is a fight card almost every weekend, and people say, oh my God, you're oversaturating the market. Man, going back in 2004, 2005, I mean, you got an event maybe every 3 months. So now here comes Tough, and we're going to get a live fight every week. It was just like the coolest thing in the world. And watching kind of a reality show, kind of giving backstory to some of these guys, it was really interesting to watch. And I became a fan from then on. And, taking some breaks here and there after Brock retired, or after Brock got injured and things happened with him. I kind of stopped watching for a while. And Ronda Rousey actually was a fighter that brought me back into watching MMA. But anyway, let's get to the list. All right, we're going to start with number 5, oddly enough. It features Ronda Rousey. It's actually the first fight she had with Miesha Tate. And this was the fight that got me back into MMA. So that's it. It needed to be number 5 or higher when I started thinking about this list, just because it's the one that got me back into watching mixed martial arts. I didn't know anything about either one of these two, except for the fact that I was, boy, this is gonna sound really country, me being in Oklahoma. I was on my riding tractor, and I was cutting the grass, and I was listening to Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez, and they just got through with the wrestling talk, so they were getting to hit MMA, and I was getting ready to kind of go to another show. But I was kind of busy working on something on that lawnmower. And so I kind of let it play a little bit. And I'm hearing them discuss this girl that has a wrestling gimmick. She's armbarring people in less than a minute. And she's hot. I said, that'd be kind of cool to check out. If it's if she's winning all these fights in less than a minute, blah, 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 blah. It'd be kind of a cool thing to watch. And I believe at the time Alberto Del Rio was on the roster. They were possibly thinking about having him adopt the same gimmick as Ronda and armbarring people in a minute. But they were reviewing this fight with Miesha Tate, and it sounded like it would be pretty interesting. So oddly enough, maybe a couple months later, whenever the Kaufman fight happened, I actually had if you remember, there was a free trial of Showtime at the time, and it coincided with Ronda Rousey versus Sarah Kaufman. But anyway, getting back to this fight. So after I watched the Kaufman fight, I went back and I was able to find this fight. And I was also able to find the tweets between the two, the press conferences, the words that got exchanged. This was two women who did not like each other at all. One woman's Tate being the champion. This girl hasn't done anything to deserve a title shot anyway. I'm gonna beat her ass. She's not gonna be able to armbar me. Let's see what she can do when she doesn't have the armbar. And this fight, these two women don't like each other. Start off, and Misha just is like, fuck it, I'm going right after her. Just throwing like these uncoordinated, ridiculous punches. And here's another kind of a myth. In case you listen to this show and you say, "Oh, I want to go back and check out that fight," let me prepare you now. Before this Holly Holm fight, when people said, "Oh, Misha gave Ronda the toughest challenge because she took her to the third round," and I would always say, "No, it was Liz Carmouche who gave Ronda the toughest fight because Liz was close to finishing her." I would also mention, look, that first fight with Tate, even though Ronda was never in a terrible position, it was a much closer fight, the first one, than the second one would be. The second one to me was kind of a destruction from the midway first round on. But this first one, I mean, there was times where Ronda was in bad positions on the ground. There were times where Misha kind of was able to get a couple shots on her. This was just a really fun fight to watch. And like I said, this was the fight once I actually sat and watched this. Even after I'd already seen the Kaufman fight, I said, "Yo, this girl's a bad girl, and I want to see her fight more often." And it renewed my love of MMA. It renewed my love for learning the different arts and all that. So I am a biased Ronda Rousey fan. Just get over it. She brought me back to the sport. That's just the nature of the beast. Number 4, I'd mentioned that I had purchased UFC 147 as my first exposure to MMA. So this fight had to be on here. If I'd have done this list a couple months ago, this would have easily been the number 3 on this list. But it's number 4, Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz, the first fight. Now, I know a lot of people love the second fight, and the second fight is normally ranked higher. But again, it's my list, so get over it. This fight, when I purchased the DVD and they're playing all this Tito Ortiz stuff, and my boss at the time was actually a MMA fan too, and a pretty good friend of mine said, "Oh man, you got to see this, man. Tito gets what's coming to him. I hate Tito. So I mean, I'm going into this like, okay, I guess Tito's like this kind of asshole, and I was reading up on stuff that about Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock, who, I mean, Ken Shamrock was in the WWE, so I mean, like, there's a pro wrestling connection with me and him there. And for him to, I thought at the time, was very disrespectful, flipping off Ken and saying "fuck you" to the Lions Den. I was just like, all right, I'm ready to see this guy get his ass whooped. So this fight, for more of an MMA background, this fight was something that was in the making for a while going into it. Tito and Chuck were teammates or training partners at one point, and Tito was this face of the UFC, and Chuck was the up and comer in the promotion. And Tito gets out there and says, "Hey, I'm not gonna fight Chuck. We're friends. We're not gonna fight each other." Chuck says, "We were never that close. We never said we weren't gonna fight. Give me my fight. I want to whoop your ass." So we finally get to this fight. Chuck, I remember the first round kind of being, it was kind of a little slow with Chuck having the advantage a little bit. And up until the end of the round where Chuck kind of unleashes his fury and it ends with a head kick. And Tito being Tito tries to kind of, come on, I want more. The whole time he's stumbling and he looks like he was almost out of it. Even though he blocked the head kick, it definitely rattled him. And it took us into the second round where, there's been finishes in MMA that I love. Terry Martin and Chris Levin's probably my favorite ever. But this finish here it's featured in the opening video of UFC pay-per-views where Chuck lands a punch, Tito gets rocked, and Chuck just goes in and just starts throwing bomb after bomb after bomb after bomb, and finally Tito crumbles. When I saw it the first time, it like blew my mind. I'm like, this fucking badass here. And it's always lived on as being one of my favorites. A, being such a cool finish to a fight, and B, it was Tito getting his ass whooped, which is always great with me. Number 3 on my list is something, like I said, I just seen recently, but it's an older fight. It's Diego Sanchez versus Gilbert Melendez. And I could be wrong on this. I believe this took place on UFC. God, which one would this have been? UFC 166, I believe. It was whatever one was Kane and Dos Santos. I believe it was their third fight, whichever card that was. Now, Diego's another one. Tough was my, first prolonged exposure to MMA was because of Tough Season 1. And Diego on the show he was fucking weird, but he's on that show. I know him. I've gotten to know him. So I'll always love Diego Sanchez. Diego Sanchez gave us the yes cartwheel, which transformed into the yes chant, which is the second greatest chant of all time. So Diego, for as much stuff I gave you on my podcast with Lewis, I am a huge fan of yours. Just want to put that out there. There was a thread on the Underground, the UG, of your favorite. I can't remember if it was asking for favorite fight or favorite comeback moment or something. So it was a thread about something like that. And someone had mentioned this fight, which I had never seen before. And I happened to be on Fight Pass that night and I said, hey, I'll see if I can find this fight. And, the first round was pretty competitive, but Gil was obviously winning. But Diego was taking some shots and still trying to walk forward. And then in the second round, Gilbert's definitely having the advantage, and Diego's starting to bleed, but he's firing up and he's telling Gilbert, come on. And he's trying, man. He is so trying to finish this fight. And he lands some shots on Gilbert, and Gilbert's still just peppering at him, keeping him at a distance, landing more combinations. And it was just at a point where the fans really made this fight, when they're so hoping that Diego finds a way to win this fight. And I mentioned this was a fight that I called in my wife and I called in my son, and I kind of gave him a brief background on each guy. And I brought him in towards the middle of the second round, kind of when the frenzy of the crowd started picking up. And I explained to him that he lost the first. Diego had lost the first round, and Gilbert was losing the second round. And so when he picked up in the third round, and I'm telling him, he needs to get a finish here. And man, Diego's just throwing everything. They're exchanging shots. It gets to a point where they kind of stop playing. There's no defense at all. No trying to block, dodge, nothing. They're just winging it. And Diego finally gets that one big shot and puts Gilbert on his ass, and the crowd explode. My wife popped up out of her chair. My son went, oh my God. It was one of those crazy things. And it sucks that Diego couldn't find a way to win that fight. But it was just so entertaining just to watch Diego, the Nightmare, just with that come forward attitude of, I'm going to win this fight. I'm going to win this fight. And the crowd just eating up every moment of it. Just a great moment inside of a fight. Number 2, this fight happened last year. And when I saw this fight live, the first minute in, I'm like, okay, this is not gonna be a long fight. This was Travis Brown versus Andrei Arlovski. Oh man, what can I say about this fight? I believe this is at UFC 187. Here, I'm gonna look that up while I talk about the fight itself. I believe it's 187. But I go to watch this fight, and about a minute in, I'm like, this fight's really not gonna last long at all. And my wife happened to be walking through the front room while I was watching the fight, and she kind of stops and kind of looks like she does sometimes. She asked me, I can't remember what she was asking me. Yeah, it was UFC 187, and all of a sudden she's asked me a question, and all of a sudden there was just a big hand from Andrei, and I believe he threw like a kind of like that weird kind of back fist that he threw, and I just went, oh shit! And my wife, who normally would get really pissed off that I was paying attention to something other than her talking to me, kind of gave me a look and then looked at the TV, and the crowd had popped, and Arlovski's going for the finish, and Brown ends up getting up. At this point now, my wife is looking at the television. At this point now, my son has walked back into the room, and for that 2-minute stretch where they're just exchanging bombs, and Travis goes down, and then all of a sudden Brown gets up and he rocks Arlovski, and then insane. My wife is just going, oh my God, what the hell's going on? My son is just freaking out. The announcers, we laughed about this so much later. Rogan and Gilbert stopped calling anything. It was, oh, he got rocked. For about a minute straight. And that's how we were reacting in the living room as well. This fight was just fucking crazy. And I know and people are probably, and I know you guys are probably thinking, okay, you put this as number 2. I've freaked out at finishes. I freaked out in moments. I just explained how I did that with Diego Sanchez. But I've never had myself freak out and everyone else in the room freak out and not be able to say anything except for, oh my God, and holy shit. That has never happened in a fight before. That was the fight that it was. To me, it was the fight of the year. I know people love Robbie Lawler and Rory McDonald. That was a great fight. The reason why I would lean towards this fight over that one, or lean to this fight even over Jones and Gustafsson, which I love that fight too, was Jones and Gustafsson felt like I had kind of seen that a little bit with his fight with Gustafsson's fight with John Jones. I might get a little bit of heat for saying this. The last 3 rounds of Lawler and McDonald were great. Great. But the first 2 rounds up until that knockdown, it was kind of boring. So they kind of takes it away. But this fight here, I mean, just to have all 3 of us freaking out in the front row, it has to be high on this list. So I put it as number 2. Now, all this talk I've had about what got me into MMA, what brought me back, you know what number 1 is. It was number 1 on the UFC's top 100 fights. A lot of people mentioned it's the first fight they ever saw. And there's a lot of credence to that claim. And people, including the UFC, have said this fight is the fight that saved the UFC. Both guys are in the Hall of Fame, and deservedly so. It features probably my favorite fighter of all time, even over Ronda Rousey. Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonnar, Tough One finale. Holy shit. If you are still listening to this podcast and you are not a fan of MMA at all, or if you're an MMA fan and haven't watched this fight, I'm not even going to tell you who won this fight. Go watch this fight. Just truly go watch this fight. And as you watch this fight, if you know nothing of the backstory, I'm not going to tell you to go back and watch season 1 of Tough, because there's not a storyline that leads you to these two. These 2 guys just won their fights and got here. They're both really nice, likable guys. Even Stephan Bonnar, who for a couple years after this, I was kind of just like, fuck Stephan Bonnar. But he's from Chicago, so Chicago boys sit together. They're both really likable guys. Like I said, there's no animosity between the two. There was nothing that should have made this any better than what it was. But if you want a little bit of a backstory, like the show was doing fine, and this fight comes on, and it's unexplainable what happened with the ratings. But the longer this fight went on, it was almost like back in the day when you would call back in the day. See, I'm 30 now, and I'm saying back in the day, where you see something on TV and you call your friend, hey, turn this on. Apparently, that's what people were doing, and the numbers grew and grew and grew and grew. And there's all types of folklore about after the end of the fight that Spike came up to Dana, and that was the fight that got Tough its second season, and it was able to save the UFC, or right after the ratings came in, yada 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 yada. Who cares? And I don't care if that's all made up. I don't care if it's true. Doesn't matter. Makes for a great story. But the fight itself, aside from being this awesome fight that I got to see for free on television, aside from the fact that I loved Forrest Griffin on the first season of Tough, just this really funny, quirky guy that was kind of like my sense of humor, the fight was just insane. There was a couple of takedown attempts. There was some dodging of shots. But these two guys just fucking went in there and went after it. What was on the line was a 6-figure contract with the UFC. So these guys are fighting for a chance to change their lives. And they went out there and just said, I'm not going to hold anything back. I'm not leaving anything in the cage. I'm just going to go out there and try to put this guy away. And if you go back and listen to Mike Gilbert on commentary, he says, towards the very beginning of the fight, somebody's getting knocked out, partner. And it never happened. These little tough bastards stood there and just waylaid on each other for 15 fucking minutes. You can see the look. Their faces are all jacked up after the fight. Like I said, I'm really, if you're not an MMA fan, if you've not watched this fight, I don't want to spoil this for you who won this fight. But at the end, with just the exasperation on both guys, when it's announced who's the winner, and the fight was so good and it was so even. I will say this. I remember watching it live, rooting for Forrest Griffin. I remember watching it, and that played a role in how I thought the fight went. Watching the fight years later, I kind of saw it the other way. And then watching the fight very recently, I went back to how I thought it was the first time. So that's how close this fight was. So close that the UFC decided to give both guys contracts. And there's a memorable line by Mike Gilbert, I want round 4. And we eventually got round 4 years later. Forrest dominated that fight. So, I mean, the sequel, this is one of those times where the sequel obviously is not as good as the original. This fight, it will never be taken off number 1 off my list. I can see the greatest fight ever, and everyone could unanimously vote on it, and it can be 99.99% of people think this fight is the greatest, and I will still say Bonnar and Griffin Tough One finale is the greatest fight I've ever seen. So I also have 3 honorable mentions. 2 guys that were on the list before, their fight was on here. Forrest Griffin and Tito Ortiz, and this was a fight, I believe Forrest may have had 2 fights in between the Bonnar fight and this one, or maybe 1. But I watched this really shortly after it happened, and I didn't know the results. And it's like, wow, Forrest Griffin's fighting like this guy who was a former champion. Like, he's in line if he can get this done. And I'll spoil this fight, obviously. Ortiz ended up winning this fight. It's controversial to me. I know to some other people it's controversial too. He went on a decision, and Tito takes down Griffin at the start of the first, or in sometime in the first, and gets some good ground and pound on him. Clearly wins round 1. Forrest comes back. He wins round 2. Not as dominant as Tito was in the first round, but it was enough for. Well, fuck MMA judging. If you're looking at it objectively, Tito won round 1. Not enough where I thought at any point the fight was going to be stopped. Forrest won round 2. Round 3 was really close. And then it looked like for a second there, Forrest is maybe ahead. And Tito lands a big-time takedown and does literally nothing with it. And Forrest is throwing elbows for the ground. He's trying to get this guy off of him, get back to his feet. He finally does. Goes in. He doesn't really go balls out like we saw with Robbie Lawler when he fought Johnny Hendricks in the second fight, where he's just kind of like, I'm going to make the judges feel like I've taken this round. I've taken this man's will. We didn't kind of get that moment from Forrest, and that might have cost him the fight. But I still, to this day, think Forrest Griffin won that fight. If you disagree with me, please tell me why. If it's going to be a case where you think the first round was a 10-8, I'm going to say fuck off. Because even if you think it's a 10-8, then it ends up being a draw. There's no way Tito won that fight. Second on my list is actually one of these guys I really, really don't like. And what happens with me sometimes is when a guy kind of retires and goes away from a while and becomes an ambassador, you kind of find out a little bit more about his personality, and kind of like person grows on you. And it still hasn't happened for me with Matt Hughes. Still has not. He's from Hillsborough, Illinois, so I mean that should get him points to me, but it just doesn't. The guy just comes across as just really fucking disingenuous and weird. And I don't want to sit here and bash the guy. He's just not my taste. Matt Hughes versus Frank Trigg, the second fight. And this one is on, I believe it was when that UFC Top 100 Fights DVD came out. It was number 3 on the list. I ended up seeing this fight. Wow, I saw this fight a couple months after it happened. I knew that Matt was still where Matt was and that he had won this fight. But what I just watching this fight and seeing Hughes get kicked in the dick was really funny to me. But one thing I can't take away from Matt Hughes, that guy was a strong and tough bastard. So he takes this nut shot and ends up giving up his back. And Frank's got this choke in. And then all of a sudden, just Matt Hughes just circles out, gets out of the choke, picks the fucker up, and runs Trigg across the octagon and slams him down. It's one of the greatest moments ever in UFC history, and anyone who saw it will tell you that. So this fight had to be number 2. Hughes ends up getting the win in this one. Another honorable mention there. And then I discussed this earlier. The third honorable mention, Jon Jones versus Alexander. I said Gustafsson earlier. Is it Gustav? I don't know. Alexander Gustafsson. The reason why is because this one and the Mark Hunt and a Bigfoot fight kind of fell in the same category with me of just, these back and forth fights where both guys are completely fucked afterwards. But the reason why this one's higher on my list is because Jon Jones, by many people's accounts, including starting to become my own, may be the greatest mixed martial artist of all time. And he goes in there and we've heard him recently, or recently in the last couple of years, say, "Hey, I wasn't really all in for this fight. I didn't train as hard." Blah 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 blah. Gustafsson took it to this fucker. He took Jon Jones down, which was something that was like almost unfathomable going into this fight. Just showed so much heart, and Jones showed as much as I don't like Jon Jones, he showed a lot of heart in this fight too, and I kind of believe him when he says he didn't take this fight seriously. And Gustafsson started putting it on him, and he showed that he's the champ. Even though Daniel Cormier is the champion right now, Jon Jones showed he was a champion in that fight. And it was a fight that elevated Gustafsson to a lot of people. Even to this day, who people say that, hey, Gustafsson beat Jon Jones that night, and Jones was scared of fighting him again. People are still saying it to this day. And people have a much higher opinion of Jon Jones for fighting a guy who he didn't see as a threat and taking him lightly and finding a way during the fight when it could have easily gone the other way around. He could have underestimated him and lost, but he found a way to fight back and win. And it was a great fight. I mean, it's not on my list because it didn't have a personal resignation with me, but it is an absolutely great fight. People will have this fight, I'm sure, on their list. A lot of people have this fight on their list. It's a great fight. You should check that one out as well. So, there you have it. You have my top 5 pro wrestling matches, my top 5 MMA fights. As far as what I got planned for the rest of my birthday, well, nothing. Absolutely nothing. I got to work. If you read my Facebook post, or on my personal page, if you read it on the Common Man Podcast Facebook page, I don't really celebrate my birthday. Not because I don't believe in it. It's just after I turn 21, and you're whatever how old you are really doesn't kind of matter until you can retire or whatever age that is. Birthdays don't mean as much to me, and I appreciate all the love and support I always get. But when people try to make your day special because it's your birthday, the only thing I'm thinking is, well, I don't want all this attention on me. I want you to have a great day. So for those who took the time to listen to me today, and me being egotistical and telling you to fuck off pretty much this whole show if your opinion is different than mine. I hope at some point that you listened to this, that you smiled, you laughed, you yelled at me, but it turns out to be a great day for you. I just want to say, whether you believe in God or not, I hope whoever you believe in blesses you. If you're having a shitty day, if you're having a disappointing day, if you're having a rough week, whatever the case may be, just take the time today and be thankful for whatever positive is in your life, and dwell on that. Don't dwell on the negative. So this is normally a time where I do all my plugs, but I'll just say this. Look, go to the commonmanpodcast.weebly.com. Everything's there. You'll find a link to our iTunes, the Stitcher, the SoundCloud. God, what else I got? YouTube, Podomatic. The Facebook page link is there as well. I have a new Twitter handle. I'm suck at radio. A new Twitter handle, which is also featured on that page. So hey, if you have any questions about how to listen to the show or ways to support the show, if you want to leave comments, questions, anything like that, just head over to the page. All the info will be there. I need to do a better job of updating it as far as news and opinions go. I'm going to try to phase in doing more of that soon. I am still, what as crazy as my work schedule has been, I'm trying to get more guests on the show. I am working on that. Bear with me on that one, but hey, at the end of the day, today's my birthday, and I took the time to record this to talk to you guys. So, coming break. And on that note, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for listening. Peace and chicken grease.